The Spain Pavilion presents Spanish painting from Romanesque to Vanguard. Perhaps it is in the field of painting that Spain has shown most brilliantly. Velázquez, Goya, Picasso. Three creators, three renovators, who raise universal painting to its highest pinnacle. Velázquez has handed down to us the sincere gaze of the intellectual artist. He shows us without artifice the truth of painting, light and color. Goya, always faithful to the promptings of his heart, breaks with the norms of his time and paves the way for modern art. Picasso personifies the genuine 20th century artist, a constant explorer of new modes of expression. Velázquez, Goya, Picasso. Color, truth, rebelliousness, light, expression, commitment, games of thought, denunciation of reality, a permanent search. Romanesque Painting. For thousands of years, the inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula left us their traces in cave paintings, Iberian ceramics, Spanish Romanesque mosaics, until we come to the mural paintings of the Asturian churches of the 9th century and the Mozarabic miniatures of the 10th and 11th centuries. Here we have the great peninsular contribution to the first European art, the Romanesque. Thousands of years, and the world is not ended. Chants of thanksgiving are intoned, pilgrimages are made, and religious art is in a state of renewal. Power is in the hands of the church and the feudal lords. Frescoes cover the great walls of the churches, creating a transcendental microcosm where every image has its symbolic significance. Romanesque painting has a dual function, to incite prayer and to teach the illiterate. The artisan painter uses a formal anti-naturalistic language, absence of light and shade, a volume of movement, of individuality, calligraphic lines, monochrome neutral backgrounds, infinite space without beginning or end. Divine space contrasted with three-dimensional finite representation of nature. Catalonia, Castile, and Aragon. The Way of St. James and its greatest work. The mural paintings in the royal pantheon of the Basilica of St. Isidore of Leon.
When we enter the Pantheon, we feel a strong emotional impact. We're struck by the vigor of the images and their intense colors. The inside opens to the exterior by means of semicircular arches. The rest is covered with paintings.
Smooth colors outlined with black lines. Inscriptions identifying scenes and figures. Abstract decorative forms.
Already here in the 10th century, a church stood dedicated to Saint Pelayo and Saint John the Baptist. Fernando I rebuilt the ancient church and closed it off with a narthex on the west side, and it became a royal cemetery.
There are three main themes in iconography: the childhood, passion, and glorification of Christ. The clergy provide the themes and their distribution. The artist transforms the pre-established code into images. Narrative images that can be read by the illiterate. Strongly symbolic images. And a surprise element: the calendar of the farmer. His characters merely profane in appearance, for within the soul of these peasants devoted to their farm labors lies the message: human labor is a divine calling. The key to it all is to be found in its funerary character. The man who lies here awaits the arrival of Christ for resurrection. Gothic painting. From the 13th to the 15th centuries, the cities come into their own, and universities are founded. In the religious sphere, St. Francis gets across a new dimension of man immersed in the world around him. Artistic language is humanized. Gothic art opts for realism with overtones of spirituality. In painting, it searches for the predominance of sentiments. Spanish Gothic art drinks from the European currents. Linear Gothic, transition from the Romanesque via beauty of form. Italian Gothic, spirit of renewal, getting closer to nature. International Gothic, refinement and use of color. Spanish Flemish painting, perfection and detail. Religious themes become humanized.
The first Spanish painter to assimilate the Flemish influence is the Valencian Luis Dalmau, who in 1445 paints a masterwork, the Virgin of the Concilieurs.
The triangular outline of the figure of the Virgin, figurative architecture that submerges us in real space. The detailing facilitated by oil techniques. The verisimilitude of the faces are some of the main achievements of this major work.
The portraits are of the magistrates of the Council of Barcelona who commissioned the canvas, protected by St. Eulalia and St. Andrew.
Renaissance painting. The liking for Flemish detail delays the oncome of the Italian Renaissance. The first influence of the Quattrocento arrives via Valencia at the end of the 15th century. The conquest of reality is manifest in scientific space by means of a geometric diagram. The emphasis on light creates contrasts, emphasizing the volume of the figures. Balance, serenity, beauty. The Spanish artists travel to Italy and become impregnated with a new style. Pedro Berruguete works in the Urbino court with Meloso da Forli and Piero della Francesca.
On his return from Italy, Pedro Berruguete combines Renaissance and late Gothic. This Annunciation from the Cartuja de Miraflores is the most perfect example. The straight line angles of the folds and the obsession with detail still belong to the Spanish-Flemish school. But dominant are Renaissance elements.
Incorporation of architectures that merge into a central fugue. Balanced composition. Volume and harmony. The protagonism of light. Serene beauty. Mannerist painting. The 16th century, culmination and crisis of the Renaissance. Epoch of religious, bellicose, and social conflict, giving rise to an anti-classical art, Mannerism. Pictorial Mannerism searches for originality, destroys unitary space, unbalances composition, and lengthens forms. Spaniards learned this new style in Italy. Pedro Machuca, fusion of influences from his master Rafael and from Michelangelo and Correggio. Alonso Berruguete, unstable long figures bathed in cold colors. Gaspar Befera, grandiosity influenced by Michelangelo. The popular Juan de Juanes softens Raphaelite forms. Luis de Morales, a personal style with deep mystical expression. The epicenter of Mannerism is to be found in the court. Philip II is building the El Escorial, and the most renowned painters make their way there to take part in the great work. Portrait painters such as Alonso Sanchez Coello and Juan Pantoja de la Cruz create a meticulous realism to ennoble their models. Attracted by the grandeur of the Spanish court, the strangest and most original figure arrives, Dominicus Theotokopoulos, El Greco, marking the culmination of Mannerism and heralding the arrival of Baroque. As a painter of icons in his native Crete, he had learned how to capture the world of the spirit. During his stay in Italy, he came under the influence of Titian and Tintoretto. He is acquainted with the monumental works of Michelangelo and the mannerism that stretches figures. And thus equipped, he arrives at the El Escorial. After failing in his attempt to get into court, he installs himself in an environment that exalts his spirit and despises earthly vanities. Magical Toledo.
And it's precisely here where he paints one of the greatest works in the history of painting, the burial of Count Orgaz, a culmination of the Toledo legend. In the 14th century dies Gonzalo Ruiz, Lord of Orgaz, a pious man, favorite of the Augustinians and devoted to Saint Stephen. In the moment of his burial, St. Augustine and St. Stephen appear miraculously and deposit his body in the sepulchre.
Two worlds, the earthly and the celestial, united by a subtle play of glances that invite us to take part in the miracle. On earth, the sacristan perceives the celestial glory and points out the miracle to us. On the opposite side, Jorge Manuel, El Greco's son, beckons us with his hand and his eyes. Only one other person looks at us, maybe El Greco himself. A friar, the parish priest of Santo Tomé, Don Andrés Núñez, who commissioned the work from El Greco, and the astonished faces of the Toledo nobility. An extraordinary gallery of portraits. An angel introduces the soul of the Count into the heavenly sphere via a nebulous path. The soul has the form of a newborn infant, because death is birth into a new life. The soul freed of the prison of the flesh, as Saint Teresa said. The color and forms mark the frontiers of heaven and earth. Here, El Greco uses unreal colors. He stretches forms even more to introduce us into a superior world. Baroque Painting. The 17th century. Century of crisis and decadence within the Spanish Empire, but nevertheless the golden age of painting. Ribera, Cano, Zubrin, Velázquez, Murillo. Pinnacles of universal Baroque painting. Contrary to what is generally believed, Baroque is diverse, offering multiple alternatives. It opts for reality, fleeing from mannerism. Predominance of color rather than line. Atmosphere is portrayed. Light is dominant. Dynamism. In Spain, especially in religious themes, naturalism dominates. The church, the greatest client of painters, wants to get closer to the people, to flatter their senses. The court, the nobility, and the scant bourgeoisie are demanding a large quantity of portraits. The first third of the 17th century brings with it a return to reality via tenebrism. The main centers: Madrid, Toledo, Valencia, Seville. Second third of the century. Appearance of Baroque painting. Color becomes warmer. Composition becomes more dynamic, and atmosphere is depicted. José de Ribera evolves from naturalism to richness of color and light in compositions of diagonal mobility. Francisco de Zubrin, the mystic religious painter, has an incredible capacity for depicting the texture of objects. Alonso Cano, cultivator of classic Baroque. Balance, idealized forms. And Velázquez, the greatest figure of all. The painter of all painters. The apparent simplicity of his work conceals the intellectual insight of his canvases that permits numerous interpretations. Painter of enigmas. His treatment of the deepest mythological themes is ironic or dignifies the deformed and the burlesque. His formal language conquers free brushwork, which he uses to trace and sketch to perfection. Last third of the 17th century. Spanish decadence culminates in the monarchy of Charles II. Painting has now reached full-flown Baroque. It is the deceptive backdrop concealing the stage machinery of the crisis. In Madrid, Juan Carreño de Miranda, Mateo Cerezo, Francisco Herrera el Mozo, Claudio Coello. In Seville, two unique personalities, Murillo and Valdés Leal. Bartolomé Esteban Murillo has the expressive force of the spontaneous brushstroke and richness of color. Juan de Valdés Leal, dynamism and chromatic expression by means of a profusion of moral symbols.
Of all the great painters of Baroque, it is undoubtedly Velázquez, with his great intellectual force, who invites us to take a closer look at one of his essential works, the Fable of Arachne. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, known as the Weavers, In 1734, in the fire at Madrid's Royal Alcazar, the tapestry weavers was badly damaged. The painting was later restored and added to with 3 pieces of canvas.
A V shape of open arms serves as the subject for the dimly lit foreground. It contrasts with the brighter central rectangle situated in the brighter lit background. The combination of light and shade leads us to the weaver at the right, who is painted in greater detail and light. This is Arachne, who boasted of being more skilled in her art than Athene, goddess of arts and crafts. Now our gaze falls on Athene, who, offended, has disguised herself as an old woman to compete with Arachne. But her bare leg gives away her youth. Our gaze now moves to the background, passing over the weaver of the center. A dimly lit, almost sketchy figure, till we come to the real center of the painting. The tapestry Arachne has woven depicts the rape of Europa by Zeus after the painting by Titian. Athene, undisguised here, is furious at the affront the tapestry represents for her father, the greatest of the gods of Olympus. She is about to turn the frightened Arachne into a spider so that she may continue to weave for eternity. Light and color. Space where the fluff of the world floats. Velasquez paints air. The distaff turns so quickly that we cannot see its spokes. Light and color at the service of the Neoplatonic concept of supremacy of the idea over manual labor. Velasquez reivindicates the grandeur of his art, of the fine arts. Painting of the 18th century. The arrival of the Bourbons to power brings great changes in the artistic tastes of the 18th century. Late Baroque continues, and the French and Italian painters who arrive at the court introduce an aristocratic art, refined and decorative. Rococo. Its greatest Spanish exponents are Antonio González Velázquez, Francisco Bayeu, José del Castillo, and Ramón Bayeu. Charles III calls the Bohemian Rafael Mengs, defender of neoclassicism, of rigorous form and clarity of composition. He influences Spanish painters, such as Mariano Salvador Maia. The 2 most singular figures of the 18th, apart from Goya, are Luis Melendez and Luis Paret y Alcázar. Luis Melendez, creator of surprising still life paintings, outstanding for their sobriety and balance. Luis Paret y Alcázar, exquisite painter of miniatures, full of freshness and refined in technique.
Probably it was the Infante Don Luis, brother of Charles III and patron of Luis Paret, who commissioned this little jewel dated 1772, The Antique Shop. The main character is a young lady, accompanied by a gentleman and a servant with a child.
Rich colors, spontaneous brushwork, destruction of lines and outlines in favor of color, and light, which envelops figures and objects.
On occasions it is said of Paris that he copied the shop of Gersaint by Watteau. But in the singularity of its elements, we can confirm the personality and originality of the shop by Paris.
Most carefully executed composition, determined by a central axis where the young lady is situated. Herein lies the key to this enchanting picture. Watteau displays the paintings, and Perret gives protagonism to the woman. She is not purchasing, she is simply admired. Faithful portrait of courtly society, sensuality, preciousness, and refinement. From Goya to Modernism. The unusual and magisterial figure of Francisco de Goya commands the transition from the 18th to the 19th century. In his youth, he was influenced by the late Gothic. In his first years in Madrid, by Rococo. He resists neoclassicism and creates a totally personal style of painting, which looks to the future. Goya creates modern painting. His 19th century contemporaries follow neoclassicism, seeking perfect outlines and academic composition, or romanticism via mannerism, via landscape painting played with subjectivity, via portrait painting, or via oriental exoticism. Others follow the tragic way begun by Goya. 6 years of revolution give rise to a greater presence of the bourgeoisie in politics and the appearance of other pictorial languages. The painting of history, realistic landscape painting, and in this environment some innovative painters appear. Eduardo Rosales. His untimely death cut short a brief life's work of unknown fire and spontaneity. Mariano Fortuny imposes his vibrant brushwork based on tiny strokes. And while Catalonia discovers European modernism, Joaquin Sorolla marks the spontaneous and luminous transition to the 20th century. And from light, we return to the brightness of darknesses, to darkness which is to light up modern art.
In 1819, Goya, old and infirm, flees the stifling atmosphere of the court of Ferdinand VII and moves to a house beside the Manzanares. Its walls are to bear witness to his personal drama and his amazing nightmares.
Horror, barbarity, mystery, anguish, witchcraft. Elementary beings moved by irrepressible, instinctive forces. With the brute force of black, Goya borders on recklessness, astonishingly free technique, suggestions that beat our senses.
And the meaning of these paintings? There is the hypothesis that talks of the existence of a train of thought.
Starting point, La Leocadia. Leocadia, his housekeeper, leaning on Goya's own tomb, invites us to witness his visions after death. A descent to Hades via Aquilere. Beings piled up before Satan. Only Leocadia appears impassive in the face of the nightmare. Saturn devours his son and destroys time. Judith cuts off Holofernes' head, while the mysterious pilgrims make their way to St. Isidore's fountain. On the floor above, the terrible parquet govern human destiny, and two men are destroying one another with cudgels. And the most disturbing, the most surprising of paintings, a dog is swallowed up by inexorable moving sands. Goya sends the mind of the tormented spectator reeling. Denunciation of the black Spanish reality. In a satiric world of indecipherable nightmares. Creation without limits. Expressionism, surrealism, modern art. Vanguards. The 20th century, the vanguards. They are born, They contrast. They disappear. The urge for originality makes painters break with all established norms. Painting is considered as a permanent investigation into the search for new languages. From Cubism to abstraction, from expressionism to surrealism, from informalism to kinetics. The Spanish contribution to the Vanguard movements is essential. Picasso, Dalí, Miro. Three approaches indispensable to the understanding of 20th century painting. Miro, an independent painter, plays an essential role in surrealism. Personal interpreter of Fauvism and Cubism, he attains a personal, ingenuous automatism as a sign of rebellion in the face of intellectual art. Hermetic hieroglyphics full of fantasy and color. Poems written with pictorial signs. Dalí resorts to the imagination and the use of traditional perspective to create a grandiloquent style of painting with perfect drawing and brilliant coloring. Classical Mask, which emphasizes his nightmarish, paranoid message. Dream, hallucination, erotic undertones, surrealist pinnacle. The 20th century is the century of Picasso. Picasso sums up and epitomizes the creative capacity and permanent search of the contemporary artist. The important thing is to create. To stop is to perish. He leaves for Paris age 19 and receives Impressionist influences. Blue period. Cold tones to portray the world of the disinherited. Pink period. Search for new paths. The experience of Cézanne and Iberian and African sculpture inspired the Demoiselles d'Avignon, the basis of Cubism. No one, till this moment, had been capable of creating a work where forms lose all contact with reality and traditional perspective is destroyed. Synthetic Cubism. Objects are broken down into multiple geometric elements. Analytical Cubism. Forms and colors that are transformed into objects. After a classical phase, the Spanish Civil War breaks out, and his language is fired with dramatic overtones. The Condor Legion bombs the Basque town of Guernica. Picasso, indignant and enraged, throws himself into a frenzy of work.
The first impression we receive from Guernica is one of terror and horror, that of the cries of its characters.
6 human beings. 3 animals. In the background, vague elements. Tiling that could be the interior of a house. An ambiguous urban landscape. A building in flames. Night, claustrophobia. Despair and barbarity. The compositional structure is based on a triple criteria. Medieval triptych, classical pyramid, and a diagonal line of force. The language of Guernica implies the formal decomposition of Cubism, which Picasso had invented 30 years previously, and which is now disintegrating at the hand of Surrealism and Expressionism.
And the significance of the symbols. For some, there is unanimity. The women and the dead child are the innocent victims of the war. The quartered warrior personifies the unknown soldier. Other symbols, however, have caused problems of interpretation, especially the figures of the bull and the horse. And even Picasso, upset by the speculation, tries to settle the question.
This bull is a bull. This horse is a horse. The public, the spectators, have to see in the horse, in the bull, symbols that interpret whatever they wish. In his final stage, Picasso continues to investigate through the history of painting, recreating and interpreting works like Las Meninas by Velázquez. Art of the Prado Museum, cornerstone of universal painting. Who hasn't felt the temptation to take a walk through this painting? Martínez del Mazo. Goya. Picasso. Dalí. Equipo Crónica. And even the creators of photography, of video art, and of cinema.